What if I told you that Pixar's original idea for Toy Story 3 was entirely different from the movie we got? Before the gang was set to go to Sunnyside Daycare, this version of the movie would have taken Woody and Buzz Lightyear to Star Command, and could have been released as early as 2002. Well, that's the pitch we'll be discussing today as we break down the story of Pixar's original idea for Toy Story 3. The year was 1999. Toy Story 2 was nearing completion after an intense production, but series creator John Lasseter was already looking to the series' future. As the sequel's development was winding down, Lasseter, along with the brain trust who spearheaded the original Toy Story, Joe Ranft, Andrew Stanton, and Pete Docter, had an idea for Toy Story 3, centered around Woody and potentially the rest of the gang joining Buzz at Star Command. John fell in love with being in Buzz's world at the beginning of Toy Story 2, and the horizon opened up for him about space and where Star Command was and all those things. He loved finding an excuse for Woody and Buzz to be in each other's worlds, or the conceit of the worlds the toys came from. In addition to the story concept, Lasseter was also adamant about developing the project as a 3D movie. Hot on the idea, Lasseter pitched Disney's at the time CEO, Michael Eisner, on doing Toy Story 3 in 3D, using Viewmaster slides of Toy Story 1 and 2. Lasseter wanted to start on the project right after the completion of Toy Story 2 and figured that they could have the movie out in about 3 years. However, Eisner rejected this pitch, wanting Pixar to create something new so that Disney could leverage those new series for merchandise and theme park attractions. Shortly after, Toy Story 2 would release to universal acclaim and far exceed the box office haul of the original film. Pleased by the sequel's performance, Eisner now wanted Pixar to make Toy Story 3. However, there was one person standing in the way of the film being made: Pixar CEO, Steve Jobs. Shortly after the release of the original Toy Story, Disney signed Pixar to a 5-movie distribution deal. But despite Toy Story 2 being the second movie released after Pixar entered this arrangement, it did not count toward their 5 films, because the agreement specified that Pixar owed Disney 5 original films, meaning 5 new sets of characters and stories that they could use for merchandise, theme park attractions, and anything else they saw fit. Jobs felt that Disney had already gotten a bonus 6th film with Toy Story 2, and wanted Toy Story 3, if it was made, to count as one of the 5 films in the deal. But Eisner, from his position of power, stood firm, which left Jobs frustrated, not wanting to make 7 films when the agreement was only for 5. In the following years, Jobs and Eisner's relationship would further deteriorate, and tensions would come to a head, culminating with Pixar publicly announcing that they'd be dumping Disney at the end of their current deal, and Eisner commissioning a new studio called Circle 7 Animation to make sequels to Pixar's movies, which Disney contractually owned, without their involvement, including a version of Toy Story 3. Though Eisner would eventually be replaced as CEO by Bob Iger, who would go back to the negotiating table with Jobs, resulting in Disney's $7.4 billion purchase of Pixar, which meant that Circle 7 would be closed, all their projects would be canceled, and Pixar would finally be able to make their Toy Story 3. According to Lasseter, literally the day after the deal was settled, we dusted off our idea and said, yeah, we'd love to do a Toy Story 3. As a part of this deal, Lasseter would go on to oversee not just Pixar, but also Walt Disney Feature Animation. With this added responsibility, he was unable to spend time directing, so he appointed Toy Story 2 co-director Lee Unkrich to direct the threequel. And Unkrich, inspired by the then-recent Lord of the Rings trilogy, was adamant that we needed to come up with a story that would feel like these 3 movies were all part of one grand story. With this in mind, in March of 2006, key Pixar artists would go on a story retreat to crack the film's plot. Lasseter began by laying out his idea from 1999. Buzz and Woody in the outer space setting of Star Command. Unkrich would recall, within 20 minutes of the first day at the cabin, we shot down that idea. The moment we started really digging into it and talking about it, we realized, this isn't good enough. And Andrew Stanton would elaborate, I kept my mouth shut until we were holed up seriously talking about how to do Toy Story 3. Then I said, I don't think that's a good idea. It's this Wizard of Oz conceit without anything behind it. I was a big wet blanket. This is very common. John will get mad and go, humph, and I'll be the bad guy for a while. We'll sleep on it, and he'll come up with an even better idea because of that. I'm used to the pattern. We woke up the next morning and started a whole new course. Pulled some small things we had liked from that idea, and thus emerged the Toy Story 3 people know. And from there, the rest is history. Toy Story 3 would go on to release in June of 2010, delivering a satisfying conclusion to the, at the time, trilogy. In 2011, Unkrich would sit down with The Hollywood Reporter to discuss the making of Toy Story 3, where he would play coy about the film's original conceit, stating, "I wish I could say what it was, but we found at the studio that we have a lot of ideas that aren't right at the moment, but we end up putting them on a shelf and they end up coming down off the shelf in some form later on." From long before to long after Unkrich made this claim, there are examples of Pixar continually practicing this philosophy and pulling elements out of this pitch. The original 2 Toy Story films had huge 3D re-releases to promote Toy Story 3, which in itself was also heavily promoted in 3D. And the Toy Story Mania attraction in Disney parks has a heavy 3D component. Lasseter's fascination with the toys inhabiting each other's worlds was glimpsed in the opening of Toy Story 3, in addition to Woody joining Buzz in space together multiple times across wider media and toys throughout the years. And most notably, the idea of Pixar exploring Star Command was made manifest with the 2022 release of Lightyear. It is fascinating how logistical circumstance was seemingly the main holdup in this pitch gaining any traction. If Eisner loved Lasseter's initial pitch in 1999 and allowed Toy Story 3 to be one of the 5 films to appease Steve Jobs, Team Pixar would have very likely gotten into the scripting stage of this Star Command version. If Lasseter wasn't promoted in 2006 and wound up personally directing Toy Story 3, would he have pushed for the Star Command plot? And then there's Joe Ranft, who Andrew Stanton credits as really coming up with the Star Command idea alongside Lasseter. He would tragically pass away the year before Pixar really began developing Toy Story 3. So had he still been around, would he have been able to convince the Pixar team that they could make the story work? While there are a ton of unknowns of what could have been, I personally believe that what wound up happening was the right choice. Toy Story 3 is a masterpiece, so I think it's for the best that this 3D Star Command version of Toy Story 3 was never made. But that's the story of Pixar's original version of Toy Story 3, and the end of yet another episode of Canned Goods. So until next time, thank you so much for watching, be good to each other, and stay Hemmas.